The Finnish winter had arrived with its full, brutal force. The temperatures plummeted to depths that turned breath into frost and froze flesh in minutes. The snow-covered landscape stretched endlessly, a vast, silent expanse under a sky that seemed perpetually grey. It was in this harsh and unforgiving environment that I, a Finnish soldier, found myself defending our homeland against the Soviet onslaught. The Winter War had begun, and our small nation faced the might of the Soviet Union. Our soldiers were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, but we had the advantage of knowing the terrain and possessing an indomitable spirit. The forests and snowfields that were our homes became our battlegrounds, the stage for a desperate struggle for survival and sovereignty. When the call to arms came, I left my home, my family, and my life behind. I joined my comrades, all of us determined to defend our country. The camaraderie among us was strong, born of shared purpose and the knowledge that we stood together against a formidable foe. We were farmers, loggers, students, and shopkeepers, united in our resolve to protect Finland. Our training was rigorous, designed to prepare us for the brutal conditions we would face. We learned to move silently through the snow, to use the trees and the terrain to our advantage, and to endure the biting cold. Our weapons were a mix of old and new, but we made do with what we had. The true strength of our army lay in our resilience and our intimate knowledge of the land. The White Death. One of our most effective tactics was guerrilla warfare. We would strike quickly and then disappear into the forest, using the cover of snow and trees to evade the enemy. Our snipers, known as the White Death due to their white camouflage suits, became legendary for their deadly precision. The Soviets feared the unseen enemy that seemed to strike from the very shadows. I remember one particular night, the sky clear and the stars shining brightly, the cold so intense it felt like it could freeze time itself. Our unit was tasked with ambushing a Soviet convoy that was attempting to move through a narrow pass. We moved silently, our breath visible in the frigid air. The only sound was the crunch of snow under our boots. We positioned ourselves along the pass, hidden among the trees and the snowdrifts. As the convoy approached, we waited with bated breath. The tension was palpable, every sense heightened by the anticipation of the coming battle. When the lead vehicle reached our position, we sprang into action. The silence of the night was shattered by the sounds of gunfire and explosions. We struck swiftly and with precision, our ambush devastating the Soviet forces. The battle was over in minutes, but it felt like hours. As the smoke cleared and the silence returned, we gathered our wounded and melted back into the forest. The Soviets had been dealt another blow, but the war was far from over. Each victory was a small, hard-earned step in a long and arduous journey. The Battle of Tolvajärvi. Following our successful ambush, we received orders to join the fight at Tolvajärvi. The Soviets had established a stronghold there, and it was crucial for us to break their defenses. The journey to Tolvajärvi was treacherous, the snowdrifts deep and the cold unrelenting. We moved cautiously, aware that the Soviets could strike at any moment. Upon reaching Tolvajärvi, we were met with a scene of chaos. The Soviets had entrenched themselves well, their fortifications strong, and their numbers overwhelming. Our commanders devised a plan to attack their flanks, hoping to catch them off guard. We moved silently through the forest, our white camouflage blending seamlessly with the snow-covered landscape. The attack began at dawn. The element of surprise was on our side as we stormed the Soviet positions. The battle was fierce, the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing through the trees. The Soviets fought back with determination, but we were relentless. The bitter cold was a constant presence, sapping our strength and testing our endurance. In the midst of the chaos, I found myself face to face with a Soviet soldier. He was no older than I was, his face a mixture of fear and resolve. We locked eyes, and for a brief moment, the war seemed to fade away. We were just two young men, caught in the same horrific reality. The moment passed quickly, and we continued to fight. The battle raged on for hours, But eventually, we broke through their defenses. The Soviets began to retreat, their losses significant. We had won a crucial victory, but the cost was high. The bodies of fallen comrades lay in the snow, a stark reminder of the brutality of war. The Battle of Suomussalmi. The Battle of Suomussalmi was one of the most significant and brutal encounters of the Winter War. Our forces were tasked with holding the line against a massive Soviet assault. The terrain was in our favor, the dense forests and frozen lakes providing natural barriers that we used to our advantage. The Soviets advanced in overwhelming numbers, their tanks and artillery pounding our positions. But we were prepared. We used the forests to set traps and ambushes, our ski troops moving swiftly and silently through the snow to strike at the enemy's flanks. The battle was fierce and unrelenting, the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing through the trees. I will never forget the sight of the Soviet tanks, their engines roaring, their tracks churning through the snow. We had little to counter them with, but we used what we had with devastating effect. Molotov cocktails, satchel charges, and anti-tank rifles became our weapons of choice. We fought with everything we had, our determination and resilience our greatest assets. The battle raged for days, the losses on both sides mounting. The cold was as much an enemy as the Soviets, the freezing temperatures sapping our strength and testing our endurance. But we held our ground, our resolve unbroken. The Soviets were eventually forced to retreat, their losses staggering. It was a hard-fought victory, but it came at a tremendous cost. The Raate Road. Following the victory at Suomussalmi, we received orders to launch an attack on the Raate Road. The Soviets were using this vital supply route to transport troops and equipment, and it was crucial for us to cut it off. The Raate Road was heavily guarded, and the terrain was treacherous, but we were determined to succeed. The attack began under the cover of darkness. We moved silently through the forest, our ski troops leading the way. The snow was deep, and the cold was biting, but we pressed on. As we approached the road, we could see the Soviet convoys moving along it, their headlights piercing the darkness. We launched our attack with precision, striking the convoys and cutting off their escape routes. The battle was fierce and chaotic, the sounds of gunfire and explosions filling the air. The Soviets fought back with determination, but we were relentless. The cold was a constant presence, sapping our strength and testing our endurance. In the midst of the chaos, I found myself face to face with a Soviet officer. He was a seasoned veteran, his face lined with years of experience. We locked eyes, and for a brief moment, the war seemed to fade away. We were just two soldiers, caught in the same horrific reality. The moment passed quickly, and we continued to fight. The battle raged on for hours, but eventually we broke through their defenses. The Soviets began to retreat, their losses significant. We had won another crucial victory, but the cost was high. The bodies of fallen comrades lay in the snow, a stark reminder of the brutality of war. The struggle for survival. The days and nights blended together in a relentless cycle of skirmishes, patrols, and the constant struggle to stay warm and fed. The cold was a constant enemy, sapping our strength and testing our endurance. Frostbite and hypothermia were ever-present threats, and we learned to adapt, to find ways to keep warm and to keep moving. Our supplies were limited, and we relied heavily on what we could scavenge or capture from the enemy. The forest provided some sustenance, but it was never enough. Hunger gnawed at us, but we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that our homes and families depended on us. One evening, as we sat around a small fire, huddled together for warmth, we received news from a messenger. A major Soviet offensive was expected at dawn, aimed at breaking through our lines and advancing towards the heart of Finland. We knew the odds were against us, but there was no thought of retreat. We would stand our ground and fight, no matter the cost. The Battle of Kollaa. The Battle of Kollaa was one of the most intense and grueling battles of the Winter War. Our forces were tasked with defending a critical line against a massive Soviet assault. The terrain was in our favor, with dense forests and frozen lakes providing natural barriers that we used to our advantage. The Soviets advanced in overwhelming numbers, their tanks and artillery pounding our positions. But we were prepared. We used the forests to set traps and ambushes, our ski troops moving swiftly and silently through the snow to strike at the enemy's flanks. The battle was fierce and unrelenting, the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing through the trees. I will never forget the sight of the Soviet tanks, their engines roaring, their tracks churning through the snow. We had little to counter them with, but we used what we had with devastating effect.